She stood 3 feet from the most dangerous-looking man in the parking lot. 20 motorcycles, leather vests, skull patches, every nerve in her body screamed, "Run!" But the real danger wasn't standing in front of her. He was behind her, leaning against a silver sedan in a pressed polo shirt, watching her every move. 7 months pregnant, bruises hidden beneath 2 shades of wrong foundation, she did the one thing no one expected. She looked into the eyes of a tattooed stranger and whispered 3 words that would change everything. What happened next made an entire town question everything they thought they knew about who the real monsters are. The August heat in Barstow, California, pressed down like a flat iron against the cracked asphalt of the Mojave. Interstate 15 shimmered in the distance, a silver thread connecting Los Angeles to Las Vegas, but there was nothing glamorous about the town sitting between those 2 promises. Barstow was a place people drove through, not a place they stopped, unless they needed gas, a restroom, or a reason to keep going. At the corner of Main Street and First Avenue, the Crossroads gas station sat like a weathered monument to better days. Its 2 pump islands had lost their shine decades ago, and the convenience store attached to it smelled permanently of burnt coffee and motor oil. A hand-painted sign near the entrance read, "Cold drinks inside," though the air conditioning unit on the roof had been rattling like a dying animal since April. Donna Caldwell stood behind the register, her reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose, flipping through the Barstow Tribune. She was 55 years old, had worked at the Crossroads for 11 years, and had seen every kind of traveler the desert could produce. Truckers who smelled like diesel and loneliness, families crammed into minivans with screaming children, college kids heading to Vegas with fake IDs and real stupidity. She had a talent for reading people in the 3 minutes it took them to buy a bottle of water and a bag of chips. But when the silver sedan pulled into pump number 2, just after 1 in the afternoon, Donna looked up and felt something cold settle in her chest, despite the 107-degree heat outside. The driver was a man in his mid-30s, clean-shaven, wearing a pressed polo shirt the color of shallow water, Craig Pemberton. He stepped out of the car with the kind of controlled precision that made Donna think of a coiled spring. Everything about him was deliberate, the way he adjusted his sunglasses, the way he stretched his neck, the way his eyes swept the parking lot like he was cataloguing every witness. Then the passenger door opened, slowly, almost reluctantly, and a young woman emerged. Audrey Whitfield, though Donna did not know her name yet, was 27 years old, with auburn hair pulled into a loose ponytail that had been tightened and retightened throughout a long drive. She was visibly pregnant, 7 months along, and she moved with the careful gait of someone who had learned that sudden movements attracted the wrong kind of attention. Donna watched through the window as Craig said something to Audrey. She could not hear the words through the glass, but she did not need to. The way Audrey flinched, a barely perceptible contraction of her shoulders, as if bracing for impact, told Donna everything a lifetime of observation had taught her to recognize. Audrey walked toward the convenience store, while Craig stayed at the pump. She pushed through the glass door, and the overhead bell chimed with false cheerfulness. Up close, Donna could see what the windshield had hidden, a fading bruise along Audrey's left jawline, concealed with foundation that was 2 shades too dark for the desert sun. Her eyes were the color of creek water, clear but tired, and they moved constantly. Toward the door, toward the parking lot, toward Craig. "Restroom?" Audrey asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Donna pointed toward the back hallway. "Straight through, honey. Take your time." Audrey nodded and walked with measured steps past the shelves of road snacks and motor oil. Donna watched her go, then looked back at the parking lot where Craig was leaning against the sedan, his phone pressed to his ear, one hand gripping the fuel nozzle like a weapon. That was when the thunder started. Not from the sky. The sky was cloudless, a brutal expanse of blue that offered no shade and no mercy. The thunder came from the east, rolling down Interstate 15 like a living thing, and Donna felt it in the soles of her feet before she heard it with her ears. Motorcycles, 20 of them, maybe more, their engines growling in a deep baritone chorus that made the windows of the convenience store vibrate in their frames. They turned off the highway exit ramp in a staggered formation, precise, practiced, and unmistakable. The patches on their leather vests were visible even at a distance. The winged skull, the rocker bars, the letters that made most people in Barstow lock their car doors and look the other way. Hell's Angels. They pulled into the Crossroads gas station like a slow-moving storm, filling the parking lot with chrome and leather and the kind of presence that makes ordinary space feel smaller. Donna counted 18, then 19, then 20. They dismounted with the unhurried confidence of men who had never needed to rush because the world generally made room for them. At the front of the formation was Garrett Dawson. He was 42 years old, 6'3", with a beard the color of iron filings and arms sleeved in tattoos that told stories most people did not want to read. His vest carried more patches than any other rider in the group. President Patch, years of road miles stitched into leather and thread. His boots were scuffed, his jeans were faded, and his eyes were the kind of dark brown that could look right through a person and see what they were hiding behind their smile. Donna had seen Garrett before. The club passed through Barstow 4 or 5 times a year, heading to rallies in Arizona or Nevada. They always bought fuel, always paid in cash, and always left without incident, but the sight of 20 leather-clad men filling her parking lot still made her grip the edge of the counter a little tighter. Craig Pemberton looked up from his phone. Craig watched the bikers with the particular expression of a man who had spent his entire life measuring himself against other men and finding them wanting. He had been a regional sales manager for a medical device company in Riverside for 6 years, and his world operated on a simple hierarchy: people who mattered and people who did not. The men in leather vests, with their unkempt beards and oil-stained hands, fell firmly into the second category. He replaced the fuel nozzle, screwed the gas cap back on, and leaned against the driver's side door with his arms crossed, projecting the kind of casual authority he practiced in bathroom mirrors before corporate presentations. His jaw was tight. Audrey had been in the restroom for too long. Inside the convenience store, Audrey stood at the sink, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror. The bruise on her jaw had yellowed at the edges, 4 days old, from an argument about dinner that had escalated into something she still could not fully remember. She pressed a wet paper towel against her face and tried to slow her breathing. 7 months pregnant, 300 miles from Riverside, heading to Las Vegas because Craig had a conference and she was not allowed to stay home alone anymore. Not since she had tried to call her sister in March. He had found the call in her phone log, and the conversation that followed had left her with a cracked rib that she told the emergency room doctor she had gotten from slipping in the shower. She placed her hand on her belly and felt the baby move. A slow, rolling kick that pressed against her palm like a question. She had been asking herself the same question for months. How do I get out? The answer had always been the same. You don't. Craig controlled the money. Craig controlled the car keys. Craig controlled who she talked to, where she went, and how long she spent in the restroom at a gas station in the middle of the Mojave Desert. Audrey dried her hands, straightened her blouse to cover the bruise on her upper arm, the newer one, still purple, and walked back through the store. She picked up a bottle of water from the cooler, more out of habit than thirst, and approached the register. Through the window, she could see the parking lot had transformed. 20 motorcycles gleamed in the sun like a metallic garden, and the men who rode them were scattered across the lot, some filling their tanks, some stretching their legs, some standing in small clusters, talking in voices she could not hear. One of them was standing directly between the store entrance and Craig's sedan. Garrett Dawson had not positioned himself there intentionally. He had simply walked toward the store for a bottle of water, the same as Audrey, and had stopped to say something to Ray Sutton, his vice president, about the route to Laughlin. But from where Audrey stood inside the store, he was the largest human being she had ever seen up close, and every cultural signal she had ever absorbed told her to be afraid of him. The leather vest, the tattoos, the beard, the patches that she vaguely associated with news stories about arrests and investigations. Everything about Garrett Dawson was designed, by choice or by circumstance, to communicate danger. Donna rang up the water bottle. $50, sweetheart. Audrey placed 2 singles on the counter. Her hands were shaking. Donna noticed and held the change out slowly, making eye contact. You okay? Audrey took the change. Fine, thank you. She was not fine. She had not been fine since September of the previous year, when Craig had first grabbed her wrist hard enough to leave finger-shaped bruises that she covered with a bracelet her mother had given her for college graduation. But acknowledging that she was not fine required a kind of courage that Craig had spent 2 years systematically dismantling. Audrey walked toward the exit. Through the glass door, she could see Craig watching, his posture rigid, his sunglasses reflecting the desert glare like twin mirrors. She could also see Garrett, still standing in the middle of the lot, now drinking from his own water bottle, his back half turned to the store. She pushed the door open. The heat hit her like a wall, and for a moment, the brightness of the sun made her squint so hard she had to stop walking. She was standing 3 feet from Garrett Dawson. He glanced down at her, a brief, incurious look that took in her pregnant belly, her sun-flushed face and the water bottle clutched in her trembling hand. He was about to look away, the way people look away from strangers at gas stations 1,000 times a day, when something made him pause. It was her eyes, not the color of them, not the shape, but the expression. Garrett had spent 23 years in the club, and in that time he had seen every shade of human emotion pass across the faces of strangers. Joy, anger, contempt, indifference, fear. What he saw in Audrey's eyes was not simple fear. It was the specific, calibrated terror of a person who has been afraid for so long that they have forgotten what safety feels like. He knew that expression. He had seen it on his mother's face every night between the ages of 6 and 14, when his father would come home from the bar, and the sound of the front door opening was the sound of the world ending. Audrey looked at Garrett. Then she looked at Craig, who was watching from the sedan. Then she looked back at Garrett, and she whispered, "He's in the car." 3 words, barely audible over the idling engines and the desert wind. But Garrett heard them the way a man hears a gunshot in a quiet room, with total, instantaneous clarity. He did not react visibly. His expression did not change. He took another sip of his water, looked casually toward the sedan, and saw Craig Pemberton standing with his arms crossed, his jaw clenched, staring back with the hollow aggression of a man who controls people smaller than himself. Garrett recognized that posture too. "Walk to the bathroom," Garrett said quietly, without looking at Audrey. "Stay inside, lock the door." Audrey's eyes widened. For a moment she did not move, paralyzed by the impossibility of what was happening, that she had just asked for help from the most dangerous-looking man in the parking lot, and he had answered her without hesitation, without questions, without the careful deliberation she had encountered from every other person she had tried to tell. Then she turned and walked back into the store. Donna looked up as Audrey passed the register again. "Forget something." "Restroom," Audrey said, and disappeared down the hallway. Donna watched her go, then looked out the window at the parking lot, where Garrett Dawson was walking, slowly, deliberately, toward Ray Sutton. Ray Sutton had known Garrett for 19 years. They had ridden together through thunderstorms in Montana, through highway construction in Nevada, through the kind of situations that most people only read about in court documents. Ray was 39, built like a fire hydrant with a shaved head and a tattoo of a compass rose on the side of his neck. He could read Garrett's moods the way a sailor reads the sky, and when Garrett walked toward him with that particular set to his shoulders, relaxed on the surface, steel underneath, Ray straightened up and put down his cigarette. "Problem?" Ray asked. Garrett spoke in a low voice, the words barely carrying past the 2 feet between them. He told Ray what Audrey had whispered. He told him what he had seen in her eyes. He told him about the man in the polo shirt leaning against the silver sedan, like he owned the entire desert. Ray's expression did not change, but his hand drifted to his belt, the way it always did when he was thinking hard. "What do you want to do?" "Talk to him." "Just talk?" Garrett looked at Ray steadily. "Just talk." Ray nodded, then turned and walked to where Tommy Hale was checking his tire pressure. Tommy was 28, the youngest patch member in the chapter, with a mop of sun-bleached hair and the earnest intensity of a man who had found purpose after years of searching for it. He had joined the club at 23, after 2 years of community college and a string of dead-end jobs that had left him convinced he would never amount to anything. The club had given him something he had never had before, a family that did not apologize for existing. Within 90 seconds, without raising his voice, without drawing attention, Ray communicated the situation to Tommy, who communicated it to the next man, who communicated it to the next. It moved through the group like a current through water, silent, efficient, and impossible to see from the outside. Craig was getting impatient. Audrey had gone back inside, and she had been gone for nearly 5 minutes. He pushed off from the sedan and started walking toward the store, his stride sharp and purposeful, the walk of a man who expected the world to part before him. He got 12 steps before Garrett Dawson was standing in his path. Not blocking him, not exactly. Garrett was simply there, occupying space the way a boulder occupies a riverbed, and Craig would have had to walk around him or through him. Craig chose neither. He stopped. "Help you?" Craig said, the words clipped, the tone designed to establish dominance in boardrooms and parking lots alike. Garrett looked at him for a long moment. In that silence, Craig became aware of something he had not consciously noticed before. The other bikers were moving, not toward him, not aggressively, but in a slow, casual drift that was rearranging the geometry of the parking lot. 2 men positioned themselves near the sedan's driver's side door. 3 more stood between Craig and the store entrance. Others filled in the gaps until Craig was standing in the center of a loose circle of leather and chrome and quiet attention. "Nice day for a drive," Garrett said. Craig looked left, then right. The casual arrangement of bodies around him was not threatening in any obvious way. No one was shouting, no one was posturing, no one had made a single aggressive gesture. They were just standing there, drinking water, checking their phones, adjusting their gloves. But the circle was unmistakable. "I need to get my wife," Craig said. "She's using the restroom," Garrett replied. "How do you know that?" "Saw her walk in." Craig's jaw tightened. The muscles in his neck formed visible cords. "Look, I don't want any trouble." Garrett tilted his head slightly. "Nobody's causing trouble." "Then move." Garrett did not move. Instead, he took a slow drink from his water bottle, crushed it in one hand, and dropped it into the trash can 3 feet to his left, without looking. "Where are you headed?" "That's none of your business." "Vegas." "I said it's none of your business." Ray Sutton appeared at Garrett's shoulder, his arms folded, his expression as readable as a concrete wall. Behind Craig, Tommy Hale leaned against the sedan's trunk, his boots crossed at the ankles, looking for all the world like a man enjoying the afternoon sun. Craig turned in a slow circle, counting faces. The realization settled over him like the desert heat. heavy, inescapable, and without mercy. Without. He was surrounded by 20 men who looked like the kind of people his mother had warned him about, the kind of people news anchors described with words like notorious and dangerous, the kind of people who existed in Craig's carefully ordered world as threats to be avoided, and he was completely, utterly powerless. For the first time in years, Craig Pemberton understood what it felt like to be the smallest person in the room. Inside the convenience store, Donna Caldwell had moved from behind the register to the window, where she watched the scene in the parking lot with the focused attention of a woman who had spent 55 years learning to trust her instincts. She could see Craig standing in the center of the bikers, his polo shirt suddenly looking absurd against the surrounding leather, like a paper napkin at a blacksmith's forge. She walked to the bathroom door and knocked softly. "Honey, it's Donna." "The lady from the register." A pause. Then the lock clicked and the door opened 2 inches. Audrey's face appeared in the gap, her eyes red-rimmed but dry, her hand resting on her belly. "Is he coming?" "No," Donna said. "He's not coming anywhere." Audrey opened the door wider. She could see the parking lot through the store window. Craig, surrounded, diminished, stripped of the authority he wore like armor. She stared at the scene for a long time without speaking. "I told the big one," Audrey said quietly. "The one with the beard. I don't know why, he was there and I said it before I could stop myself." Donna nodded. "Sometimes the mouth knows before the brain does. Everyone says they're dangerous. The news, the shows, everyone. They're supposed to be the people you stay away from." "And your husband?" Donna asked gently. "What is he supposed to be?" Audrey did not answer. She did not need to. Outside, the confrontation had shifted from physical positioning to something more devastating: conversation. Garrett had not raised his voice once. He stood in front of Craig with the patience of a man who had learned that silence was more powerful than shouting, and he asked questions in a tone that was almost conversational. That bruise on her jaw. "She run into a door?" Craig's face flushed. "I don't know what you're talking about." 7 months pregnant. Walking like she's afraid of her own shadow. Hands shaking so bad she could barely hold a water bottle. She has anxiety. She's on medication. "What medication?" Craig opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "That's private medical information." Ray Sutton spoke for the first time. "My sister had anxiety, real anxiety, diagnosed by a real doctor. She didn't have bruises on her face." Tommy Hale straightened up from the sedan. "And she didn't flinch when her husband talked to her." Craig's eyes darted between the men. The polish was cracking, the carefully maintained surface fracturing under pressure it had never been designed to withstand. Craig Pemberton had built his entire identity around control. Control of his environment, control of his image, control of the people around him. In boardrooms and living rooms, that control was absolute. But standing in a gas station parking lot in Barstow, surrounded by 20 men who did not care about his job title, his income bracket, or his carefully pressed polo shirt, Craig's control evaporated like water on hot asphalt. "You don't know anything about my marriage," Craig said, but the words came out thin, defensive, stripped of the authority they usually carried. "I know enough," Garrett said. He took a step closer, not aggressive, not threatening, but close enough that Craig could see his own reflection in Garrett's sunglasses. "I know what a woman looks like when she's been hit. I know what fear looks like when it's been there so long it becomes furniture, and I know what a man looks like when he's only brave in private." The words landed like stones in still water. Craig's mouth worked silently. Around him, 20 men stood in absolute quiet, and in that quiet, the truth of the situation became unbearable. Garrett reached into the inside pocket of his vest. Craig flinched, a fast, involuntary contraction that revealed more about his character than any words could have. What Garrett produced was not what Craig feared. It was a business card, slightly bent at one corner, printed on plain white stock. "National Domestic Violence Hotline," Garrett said, reading the back of the card, though he knew the words by heart. He had carried these cards for 16 years, ever since his mother had finally left his father and moved into a shelter in Bakersfield. "There's also a number for the San Bernardino County Women's Shelter on the back, open 24 hours. He held the card out, not to Craig, but past him, toward the store entrance, where Audrey now stood in the doorway, Donna's hand resting gently on her shoulder. Audrey looked at the card. Then she looked at Garrett, at the leather, the tattoos, the patches, the beard. Every visual marker that society had taught her meant danger. And she saw, perhaps for the first time in her life, how completely wrong those markers could be. She walked forward and took the card from Garrett's hand. "Thank you," she said. Garrett nodded. "You don't have to go with him." "I know. Do you have somewhere to go?" Audrey hesitated, then slowly, like a door opening that had been locked for years. "My sister, in Flagstaff." "That's about 4 hours east," Ray said. "We're heading that direction." Craig stepped forward. "She's not going anywhere with you. She's my wife." Garrett turned to Craig with an expression that contained no anger, no menace, and no compromise. "She's a person. And right now, she's choosing." The word hung in the air, choosing, and it carried more weight than any fist ever had. Donna reappeared from inside the store with a phone in her hand. "I called the sheriff's office. Deputy Mitchell is on his way. 15 minutes. Craig's face went white. "You called the police? On what grounds?" "On the grounds that a pregnant woman is standing in my store with bruises on her face and her body, and her husband is standing in my parking lot acting like he owns her." Donna's voice was steady, matter-of-fact, the voice of a woman who had waited a long time to say something she should have said years ago, to someone else, in some other parking lot, on some other day. She had chosen to look away. Deputy Tom Mitchell arrived in 14 minutes, driving a San Bernardino County patrol car with the windows down because the air conditioning had broken in June and the department budget would not cover repairs until October. He was 47 years old, had been with the department for 22 years, and had handled enough domestic disturbance calls to recognize the pattern before he finished parking. Man in a polo shirt, red-faced, gesturing emphatically. Pregnant woman standing apart, arms wrapped around herself. Gas station attendant with a phone and a set jaw. And 20 Hell's Angels arranged around the parking lot like a jury that had already reached its verdict. Mitchell stepped out of the car and adjusted his belt. He had dealt with the club before, traffic stops, noise complaints, the occasional bar disagreement in Lenwood. They had always been cooperative, if not exactly warm. He approached Garrett first, because Garrett was the one standing closest to the center of whatever had happened. "Garrett, deputy, wanna tell me what's going on?" Garrett told him. Plainly, without embellishment, without drama. He described what Audrey had whispered, what he had observed, and what he had done, which was, essentially, stand in a parking lot and have a conversation. Mitchell walked over to Audrey. He spoke to her quietly, professionally, the way he had been trained. He asked if she felt safe. He asked if she had been injured. He asked if she wanted to press charges. Audrey answered the first 2 questions with the truth. The third question she answered with silence that lasted long enough to change the temperature of the air around her. "Not today," she said finally, "but I want to go to my sister's house in Flagstaff." Mitchell nodded. He took photographs of the bruises on Audrey's jaw and upper arm, documented her statement, and ran Craig's license through dispatch. No outstanding warrants, no prior arrests. The clean record of a man who had learned to confine his violence to places where no one could see it. Craig was not arrested that afternoon. There was not enough for an arrest, not with Audrey declining to press charges, not with the bruises undocumented by any prior medical report. But Mitchell told Craig in clear and specific terms that a report had been filed, that the photographs were in evidence, and that if Craig attempted to contact Audrey or follow her vehicle, additional charges would follow. Craig said nothing. He stood beside his silver sedan with his arms at his sides, the polo shirt dark with sweat, his face carrying the expression of a man who had been publicly stripped of something he could not name but desperately needed. The logistics of Audrey's departure were handled with surprising efficiency. Donna made 3 phone calls, one to the Greyhound station in Barstow, one to a women's resource center in Victorville, and one to the number on the back of Garrett's card. Within an hour, a plan had formed. Audrey would travel to Flagstaff not by bus, but by car, driven by a volunteer from the resource center who made this kind of trip 3 or 4 times a month. But the volunteer was coming from Victorville, an hour and a half away, which meant Audrey would need to wait. "We're not in a hurry," Garrett said. And they were not. 20 men settled into the parking lot of the Crossroads gas station in Barstow, California, on an August afternoon that would eventually reach 112 degrees, and they waited. They bought coffee from Donna's reluctant machine. They checked their bikes. Tommy Hale found a deck of cards in his saddlebag and started a game of spades on the concrete beside pump number 4. Audrey sat inside the store, in the folding chair Donna brought from the back office. She drank water and watched the parking lot through the window, and something in her chest began to loosen. A knot she had carried so long she had forgotten it was there. At one point, Garrett came inside to buy another water. He paused near her chair, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "Can I ask you something?" Audrey said. "Go ahead. Why did you help me? You didn't know me. You didn't know anything about me." Garrett looked at her for a long time. Then he sat down on the overturned milk crate beside the candy display and rested his forearms on his knees. "My mother," he said. "She was in your situation for 8 years. My father was a foreman at a concrete plant in Bakersfield, coached Little League on Saturdays. Everyone in the neighborhood thought he was a great man. Pillar of the community." He paused. "He broke her arm twice, fractured her cheekbone, gave her a concussion that left her with headaches for the rest of her life." Audrey's hand moved unconsciously to her jaw. "Nobody helped her," Garrett continued. "Not the neighbors, not the church, not the police, nobody. Because my father wore khakis and a clean shirt and went to work every morning, and my mother wore long sleeves in July and smiled when anyone asked how she was doing. And everybody looked the other way, because the man doing the hurting didn't look like the kind of man who hurts people." He glanced out the window at the line of motorcycles gleaming in the sun. "People look at us and see criminals, outlaws, threats. They cross the street, they lock their doors, they hold their kids a little tighter." He turned back to Audrey. "But none of us ever put a bruise on a pregnant woman's face. And that man out there in his nice shirt, with his clean record and his corporate job, he did, so you tell me. Who's the dangerous one?" Audrey did not answer. She did not need to. The volunteer from Victorville arrived at 4:17 in the afternoon. Her name was Patricia Wells, 41 years old, driving a white Honda Accord with a child's car seat in the back from a previous trip. She had been doing this work for 5 years, since leaving her own abusive marriage, and she moved with the quiet competence of a person who had turned pain into purpose. Patricia helped Audrey into the car, adjusted the seat to accommodate her belly, and placed a small bag of supplies, water, snacks, a prepaid phone, on the back seat. Donna had added a bag from the convenience store. Crackers, juice, and a handwritten note that said, "You are braver than you know." As the white Honda pulled out of the gas station, Audrey looked through the rear window. 20 men stood beside their motorcycles, watching her go. Some of them raised a hand. Others simply stood, their silhouettes dark against the blinding desert sky. She had entered the Crossroads gas station, believing that the men in leather were the danger and the man in the polo shirt was safety. She left knowing that the truth had been exactly the opposite, that the surface of a person is the least reliable map of their character, and that help can come from the last place you think to look for it. Garrett watched the Honda disappear down the highway on-ramp, heading east toward Arizona. Ray appeared beside him, lighting a fresh cigarette. "Ready to ride?" Ray asked. Garrett put on his sunglasses. "Yeah." 20 engines started in staggered succession, the sound building from a rumble to a roar that shook the windows of the Crossroads gas station. They rolled out of the parking lot in formation, chrome catching the afternoon sun, leather darkened with sweat, heading east on Interstate 15 toward Laughlin and whatever road lay beyond it. Donna Caldwell stood at the window and watched them go. She had seen every kind of person the desert could produce, and today she had learned something she would carry for the rest of her life, that the most dangerous thing in the world is not a man on a motorcycle. It is the certainty that you already know who someone is before they have the chance to show you. Craig Pemberton sat alone in his silver sedan in the parking lot, the engine off, the windows up, the air conditioning running on full. He stared at the empty highway and said nothing to no one, because there was no one left to control, no one left to diminish, no one left to hurt. And in the silence of that empty parking lot, with the desert stretching out in every direction like a verdict, Craig Pemberton became the smallest thing in Barstow, California. The white Honda Accord crossed the Arizona state line at 6:43 in the evening, just as the sun was beginning its slow descent behind the mountains. Audrey had her hand on her belly, feeling the baby kick, steady now, rhythmic, like a heartbeat answering a heartbeat. Patricia glanced over from the driver's seat. "Almost there. Another 2 hours." Audrey nodded. She was looking at the road ahead, not behind. The business card from Garrett was tucked into her pocket, slightly bent at the corner, carrying the weight of a promise that strangers had kept without being asked. She would call her sister from the prepaid phone when they reached Flagstaff. She would file a restraining order in the morning. She would begin, slowly and imperfectly and with tremendous courage, the process of rebuilding a life that had been systematically dismantled by a man who looked like safety and felt like a prison. And somewhere on a highway between Barstow and Laughlin, 20 motorcycles thundered through the desert, ridden by men the world had already judged and dismissed, carrying with them the quiet knowledge that the most powerful thing a person can do is not what the world expects of them.